All right, welcome back. Linkage institutions, finishing up primaries. All right, so superdelegates. I want you to start by highlighting this term. It is going to be important for sure, and it's one of those things that, again, it's a little complicated. It can be a little confusing. All right, superdelegates. First of all, it's the third bullet point down there, but I think it's the first thing I want to say. Only Democrats have these. All right, so superdelegates are part of the Democratic Party only. What are superdelegates? They are party leaders and elected officials who automatically get to be delegates at the National Convention. Okay, so we got to think about who delegates are. So again, this is the third video in a row we're talking about delegates, which is good because they are important. Delegates are regular people like you and I that when a candidate wins a state, so they win the state of Florida, they get to choose. So Donald Trump got to choose 100 people from Florida to go to the National Convention, and they promised that they would vote for him. So they weren't allowed to vote for anybody else. They had to go and they had to vote for Donald Trump because the voters in the state of Florida voted for Donald Trump. Okay? That's a regular delegate. Superdelegates, something that Democrats have, these are people. They are politicians. If you look on the right-hand side, that graphic, it says who are the Democratic Party's delegates, superdelegates. They are members of the House of Representatives, they are senators, they are governors, distinguished party leaders, that means presidents and past presidents, and then members of the Democratic National Committee. And so there's about 750 of them or so, and they get to go to the National Convention just like all the delegates that were won in state to state, and they get to vote for whoever they want. So you have those 4 bullet points. Their votes cannot be won. So there is no election for the votes of superdelegates. They get to simply choose to vote for whatever candidate they want. Again, only Democrats have superdelegates. And maybe the most important thing is that this is criticized as being undemocratic. For those of you who followed Bernie versus Hillary, Bernie was very mad about superdelegates. And the reason for that is because they overwhelmingly supported Hillary. And so he got mad because, in his opinion, he was doing okay among winning elections. He still didn't do as well as Hillary, but he did much better there. It was a lot closer. And yet, despite him, pretty much battling her closely in state elections, she was getting an overwhelming amount of the superdelegates, like well over 90%. And so he thought that that wasn't fair, and that's undemocratic because ultimately they don't have to listen to how the voters vote. So they can essentially try to pick a candidate that isn't the one that's winning voters in the state elections, in the primaries. So it is something that is definitely criticized. Finally, defining National Convention, after we've talked about it like 10 times, you can see that this is from 2012. That's the National Convention for Mitt Romney when he was nominated officially as the Republican candidate. And so that's what happens at the National Convention. It's basically like a 4-day infomercial or, big party for the party where they get free TV every night, and you have lots of speeches by other famous members of that party and supporters, it's where kind of the general election starts, because you officially have your candidate and they start attacking the other party's candidate rather than their own party, the other candidates from their own party. All right, one important thing to know is we have not always had primaries. I would make a note here that this really started in 1968. Like the modern primary system is 1968. That's why I have that picture with Hubert Humphrey there. And it has made the nomination process more democratic because it gives people more control over picking their party's candidates. Still not total control, but the idea is that it's more democratic because, remember, democracy means people having power. So it is more democratic because people have more power to choose their candidate. This isn't a history class. What I would tell you might want to add, again, as little notes here. Prior to 1968, there were still primaries, but they didn't really mean anything. So what I would make a note of is that the party leaders chose candidates before 1968. Party leaders chose the candidate up until 1968. And today they have less power, and now people have more power in choosing their party's candidate. That is something that the FRQ loves to ask about, is this right here. So I would say this is something you want to be able to write about. Criticisms of the primary system. Too much importance placed on early states. So Iowa is always the first state. Always. And are they representative of the United States as a whole? And the answer is, well, no. They're like 95 or 96% white. There's not much diversity at all. They are an agricultural state, no big cities. New Hampshire is the second state. So again, you have these states that are not representative of the entire country. Why are we giving Iowa and New Hampshire so much importance? Because really, when you lose in Iowa and New Hampshire, it can greatly harm your entire candidacy. So why do we give those states that much power? Caucus voters especially are more ideological. So are primary voters for that matter too, though. And again, the point is that the people who vote in primaries and caucuses are not representative of the average American. They are much more liberal or much more conservative, typically. So the Democrats are more liberal Democrats that vote in the primaries. The Republicans who vote in primaries are more conservative. Most Americans are neither very conservative nor very liberal. They are somewhere in between, and yet the people who choose the candidates are the ones that are more ideological. And then you have this idea, and I will talk about this in class a lot more. Candidates appeal to the more ideological voters in primaries. So again, who votes in primaries? The ideological voters, the very conservative Republicans, the very liberal Democrats. Then in the general election, they try to appeal to the voters in the middle. Because just thinking about it honestly, somebody who's very liberal, there's no chance that they're going to vote for Mitt Romney or for Donald Trump. Somebody who's very conservative, there's no chance that they are going to vote for Obama or for Hillary. So you don't really need to worry about the extremes in your party anymore. Where you win and lose in the general election is the moderates, the independents, the people who sometimes vote Republican and sometimes vote Democrat. Those are the people you focus on in the general election. So the criticism here is that you kind of have candidates who act two completely different ways. In the primary, they try to act as liberal as they can. Then comes the general, and now they want to act more moderate. Or they go from being conservative, so Mitt Romney more conservative in the primaries, and then he became more moderate in the general election. And this has been a LaMoney production.